Hey guys, welcome back to Enlightened Turtle. It's your host Kev here. As I mentioned in that previous video up on Billings Hill, I had something to say on canines and chariots. So let's get straight into this one. The oldest claimed record of domesticated dogs being used in cattle rearing in Greece are to be found in the Iliad, which is assumed by the mainstream historians to be based in the eastern part of the Aegean Sea / southwestern Anatolia. The Greeks apparently came to appreciate their canine friends, and dogs became an integral aspect of ancient Greek life during the Hellenistic period, some 300 to 30 BC, and were celebrated in Greek art, poetry, and honoured as friends and family through images on tombs, as was the case in Egypt according to Herodotus. Information on dogs in ancient Greece comes from several sources, which vary, most notably from Xenophon. This is Xenophon's Synegeticus. I butchered that word probably. It means how to hunt with dogs. In it, Xenophon covers various canine topics such as how to train your dog, what are the best names, what are the best collars, and the best leads, so on and so forth. Other ancient literary accounts survive, including certain Greek myths. Perhaps the most famous mythical dog is Cerberus, the three-headed hound that lived in the underworld and belonged to Hades, god of the underworld. If we are to believe Imam Wilkins, then Hades is across the English Channel or the North Sea between East Anglia and modern day Holland. Obviously that area, according to Imam, is the Hellas Sea. I'd refer anyone to my video on that for more information. The epic poet Homer also mentions dogs in both his Iliad and the Odyssey. Indeed, it is in Homer's Odyssey that we have one of the most emotive accounts of a dog from ancient Greece. Odysseus, the Greek hero, had just returned to his homeland, his homeland of Ithaca, which, according to Imam, is in modern-day Cadiz in Spain. After 20 years away, he is forced to approach his old palace in disguise. On his way, he caught sight of his old hunting dog, Argos. So again, the reference is to hunting. Those left behind on Ithaca had treated Argos terribly ever since Odysseus had left to fight in the Trojan War some 20 years earlier, which makes me think that dogs live longer in the past, who knows. Nevertheless, upon seeing the disguised Odysseus, Argus immediately recognized his master. According to Homer, Argos's ears dropped, he wagged his tail, unable to acknowledge Argos, however, lest he blow his disguise. An emotional Odysseus walked on by, and with that, Argos died. Now, I'm not being funny, but that's pretty heartbreaking, especially to any of us who've actually ever had a pet or a dog and actually shared that bond. You do become to realise pretty quick that, animals are sentient. And to be fair, this is probably where we get the notion of a dog's unwavering loyalty or, man's best friend, etc. Moving on. Although the majority of Greek written works on dogs deal with hunting, many of the most famous praise them for their intelligence, resourcefulness, and loyalty. Yet we do not find usage that I have come across of dogs being used by farmers for rearing cattle. There is thought to have been a dog called the Alopecus, which is a small, ancient, primitive landrace of dog from Greece and adjacent regions of the Balkan Peninsula. Alopecus have prick ears, a curved tail, and a double coat. Alopecus were allegedly bred to be a multi-purpose dog from farming, functioning as a hunting dog, a watchdog, and also allegedly a shepherd. The dog is found throughout Greece, but is most commonly seen in northern Greek regions with a lot of farmland and villages such as Ceres, Drama, and Xanthi. This northern region of Greece will become a more focused area in the future, and again, think Dorians. Critically endangered, there are thought to be only around 50 known examples of the Alopecia breed remaining today, which is not cool to be honest. The scholar G.M. James claims in his work Stolen Legacy, the Egyptian origins of Western philosophy, which is his theory, that the pre-Socratic Greek philosophy derived beliefs and practices from Egypt. In the same way, it is probable that the dog collar also made its way from Naucratis to Athens and other city-states of Greece via trade. The pharaoh Amasis II allegedly founded the city of Naucratis in 570 BC. I have already done a video on Herodotus in the past discussing domestic animal traditions in ancient Egypt if anyone's interested. But it is, as he states there, so that city is from 570 BCE, the founding, so any transference of dogs, collars and all this information that allegedly came into Greece from Egypt, according to this chap G.M. James, George G.M. James. So we have to think then anything after that is post 570. So even by the most conservative estimations of the Trojan War, we're talking 650 BC, so there's a bit of a gap there. Here is a quote from Homer's Iliad. Antiochus, brave soldier though he was, would not stay to face him, but fled like some savage creature which knows it has done wrong, and flies when it has killed a dog or a man who is herding his cattle. So that was the first quote that we've extrapolated from the Iliad, and already we can see reference to dogs and men who herd cattle. Watching a documentary by Francis Pryor, which was very recently, he revealed that he had found Bronze Age canine bones in East Anglia, a theorised location for a Celtic Trojan War, Troy being on the Eider Hills of Cambridgeshire as discussed in the past. The bones found were more that of a similar breed to a border collie, the type of dog breed specifically bred for rounding up cattle, and found at farmlands across the world today, rather than used for hunting dogs. Here we shall listen to what Francis Pryor has to say on this discovery in his book, Britain BC, regarding the wave movement, unquote, from Asia Minor to Britain. There were many other things that made me doubtful about the wave of advance as it applied to Britain, but like most of my colleagues, I held my peace, not wishing to be blown out of the water by academic big guns who rumbled ominously in the distance. That did not stop me or my friends from publishing our thoughts. We just did not invite confrontation. Besides, I suspect that many of the down-to-earth excavation and survey reports in which we voiced these heresies were not the staple reading of the big gunners. One of the problems practitioners will have to confront is the linking of genetic maps to archaeological distribution maps. As it is always a process that lends itself to misinterpretation. We saw it with the spread of radiocarbon dates that were linked to the Neolithic wave of advance, and thence mistakenly to the spread of actual people. I suspect we'll see something similar in this newly emerging field soon. The trouble is, the most misleading papers always look the most convincing at first glance. Ain't that the truth? One of the reasons I decided to write this and other books for the general reader was that I had acquired personal experience of farming. I lived, you could say, through my own Neolithic revolution. As a sheep farmer of almost 20 years' experience, I am struck again and again by the fact that livestock, farming, and the husbandry of the herds preyed on by a hunter, are two sides of the same coin. I cannot see that there is a big difference between the two. A difference, yes, but not a huge one. This was this was first brought home to me when I learned how to handle a sheepdog. My dog is a border collie bitch named Jess, a short, sharp name like Cap or Dan that was intended to be shouted across the fields and fenlands, or fells, he says. I just want to stop real quick there, because did you notice that when he says Cap or Dan, a short, sharp name that was intended to be shouted across the fields and fells, that kind of makes me think of Xenophon and Xenophon's book, where he says there's certain names for certain dogs. So I wonder if there was certain names for certain dogs, almost as if like, what's the right word? You know, did the certain names designate certain jobs for certain dogs, if that makes sense. So quoting Francis again now. So what was the domesticated dog found at Starcar used for? It was smaller than a wolf and would hardly constitute a direct threat on its own. To say maybe a stag, but it could have been used like a sheepdog to drive flock or a herd of animals towards concealed hunters. I don't know whether dogs were used in this way in the past, but given that we know about the reduced territories of Mesolithic hunters, it wouldn't surprise me if they, in effect, slightly domesticated their prey in this manner. Brian Sykes and his team were probably unaware that many of us archaeologists working in Britain were already unhappy with the idea of large-scale Neolithic migrations from across the Channel, so he may have been surprised that the announcement of his results only stirred up trouble amongst the academic big guns, unquote. I will note I was reading a study a few days ago in which the breed of wolf that seemingly led to the dog, the ancient dog, the ancestor of all modern dogs, remains undiscovered, indicating they are, as stated, an evolution from a missing link, or more skeptically, an independent breed of canine. Now, I'm not saying one way or the other there, but this missing link that all dogs are descended from, and we all assume, and would hesitate to guess that dogs do come from wolves. However, we do not have the missing link. We do not have the breed of wolf to which dogs descended from. Here we have quotes from Homer referencing dogs used in cattle rearing. Quote, "As sheepdogs watch their flocks when they are yarded and hear a wild beast coming through the mountain forest towards them." Here's another quote. "Dogs and shepherds raise a hue and cry against him, but they stand aloof and will not come close to him." Unquote. These canine bones found in East Anglia were also found near a Bronze Age farmstead in an area known as the Fens. This is another potential vindication of the Society of Britain being far more advanced than we are led to believe, which has revealed several ancient and incredible finds, and we will have more on the Fenlands in the future. Northern Europe is more than capable of being the location for the epic poems of the Trojan War, and like I said, we'll have more to come on this and the archaeology in the future. We have referenced dogs, cattle usage and farming going back 3,000 plus years, yet more incredibly is the discovery that has pushed potential dates of farming in Great Britain back, with evidence of wheat 2,000 years before the alleged farming arrived from Asia Minor via Greek expansions into Britain. which is absolutely incredible, to be quite honest, because how can you have these speculated dates and then we find this grain? Now, this grain either indicates influx from areas that are producing the grain, or it indicates that the area itself is producing grain. A quote now from a paper written by Vince Gaffney and Robbie Allaby from the universities of Bradford and Warwick. Wheat has been found in a settlement on England's south coast dating to 6000 BCE. That's 2000 years before farming reached Britain. This finding overturns many cherished archaeological beliefs or myths about the era. Though they were once patronised as simplistic hunter-gatherers, it turns out early Britons must have been active traders with agricultural superpowers of their day in France and the Balkans. It's time to reassess Mesolithic man, unquote. And I have to say, well put, that's well put that. A recent excavation in Cambridgeshire yielded bones of what is believed to be a Sarmatian Romano-British person, now good luck trying to work that one out, who travelled to Britain from Eastern Europe 2000 years ago. The method of dating was to use the layers of the patina on the teeth. As teeth develop over time, so just like tree rings, each layer records a snapshot of the chemicals that surrounded them at that moment in time. The analysis, showed that until the age of 6, he ate millets and sorghum grains, known scientifically as C4 crops, which are plentiful in the region where Sarmatians were known to have lived. But over time, analysis showed a gradual decrease in this consumption of these grains and more wheat found in Western Europe, according to Professor Janet Montgomery. And I quote now, "The analysis tells us that he, and not his ancestors, made the journey to Britain. As he grows up, he migrated west and these plants disappeared from his diet." This article also claims wheat is found predominantly in Western Europe only 2000 years ago. It seems people were travelling freely in numbers or alone to Britain, building up numbers leading into the period of the time when Britain begins to be overwhelmed by numerous waves of migration. Perhaps this person was a prisoner of war, part of a slave trading network, a child of a foreign marriage, or several other possibilities. Who can really say? Here Homer speaks again and mentions something very interesting. Quote, "Achilles next offered the massive iron, quote, which mighty Ition had erewhile been used to hurl, until Achilles had slain him and carried it off in his ships along with other spoils." So I'll just end that quote real quick there. I'm not sure who this mighty Ition is, and I might have to do a further breakdown of this person to find out who he is. Back to the quote. "He stood up and said among the Argives, 'Stand forward, you who would essay this contest. He who wins it will have a store of iron that will last him 5 years.' And they go rolling around as if its fair fields lie far from the town. His shepherd or ploughman will not have to make the journey to buy iron, for he will have a stock of its own on his own premise," unquote. In that passage we see again reference to fair fields to be found in abundance in Britain, France, Holland and Belgium of today. He mentions a townsman's shepherd and ploughman, and of course the iron. Now again, I'm not too sure if this is an iron weapon or not. I'm not really too sure. Though, could this be the iron ore, as mentioned in the previous Gog Magog video, of which iron ore once littered the ground in Britain, and in some places still does? Achilles must also be the focus of attention in his own video. I may look to do a chain of videos breaking down specific figures pertaining to this Trojan conflict, if people are up for that, that is. There are a couple more Homeric quotes I would like to share pertaining to wheat and dogs. Quote, "And now as a band of reapers mow swats of wheat or barley upon the rich man's land, and the sheaves fall thick before them, even so did the Trojans and Achaeans fall upon one another. They were in no mood for yielding, but fought like wolves, and neither side got the better of the other." Another quote now. "Thus then were the Achaeans hemmed in at their ships, calling out to one another, and raising their hands with loud cries, every man to heaven. Nestor of Gerene, tower of strength to the Achaeans, lifted up his hands to the starry firmament of the heaven, and prayed more vehemently than any of them. Father Zeus / Jove, said he, if ever anyone in wheat-growing Argos burned you fat thigh bones of sheep or heifer, and prayed that he might return safely home, whereon you bowed your head to him in assent, bear it in mind now, and suffer not the Trojans to triumph thus over the Achaeans." Unquote. Wheat growing in Argos would resonate with the fertility of Paris in France, rather than the arid and sandy topography of Argos in the Eastern Mediterranean. Iman Wilkins, in his book Where Troy Once Stood, brings to attention the possibility or the potential corruption from possible oral tradition into the earliest writings of the Iliad. The name Hellas was originally Hellas, for example, and the word Argos was pronounced with a lowercase a as Argos rather than Argos, which was a common noun amongst other things, meaning a plain or untitled land. Hellas meaning watery marshland or meadow, as referenced by the Greek geographer Strabo. So back to Homer again now. "The chiefs disposed their men this way and that before the fight began, drafting them out as easily as goat herds drafted their flocks when they have got mixed while feeding." Unquote. So we hear flocks of goat herds there. Another, "As sheepdogs that watch their flocks when they are yarded and hear a wild beast coming through the mountain forest towards them, forthwith there is a hue and the cry of dogs and men, and slumber is broken, even so was sleep chased from the eyes of the Achaeans, as they kept the watchers of the wicked night, for they turned constantly towards the plain whenever they heard any stir amongst the Trojans." Unquote. The plain described in all versions of the great and ultimately successful siege of Troy seems far larger than the plain of Hisarlik in western Turkey, the plain of which is actually larger today than it was 3,000 years ago, much like the wash of the great fenlands of eastern England today. One thing I do need to mention as well there is that in that last reference from Homer, we hear the direct words, "as sheepdogs that watch their flocks." I am not claiming that agriculture or dogs used for cattle rearing began in Britain. I am showing that they existed archaeologically in the West at the time of the Trojan conflict, during the periodical spread of the hypothesized dating from 650 to 1200 BC. Like I say, there's several different theories. We have to take into account that chronology is being massively tampered with, so what could be 1200 BC could actually be 600 BC, it could be anywhere in between. Next we shall look at chariots of the Iliad. We can find that the most likely form of chariot and their usage, which is style and engagement, tactics and manoeuvrability, best fits those of the British Celtic variety. Homer's epic works, the Iliad and Odyssey, are the most famous depictions of chariot and chariot warfare alongside the also famous Egyptian Battle of Kadesh. We shall in a moment go back to the Iliad. Whether or not these depictions are accurate or not is down to us to judge for ourselves. Firstly, the Minoans and the Mycenaeans appear to have learned of the chariot through contact with the Hittites, which we have already established. We do have this British Hittite connection in deep antiquity. While the Minoans do appear to have made use of the chariot, it was adopted at a very late date towards the end of their civilization, which makes me think, could this be an invading force? Who knows? Whence the Dorians begin to arrive in the Aegean. These Minoan and Mycenaean chariots were lightweight and drawn by a pair of horses. It is thought the Mycenaeans made extensive use of chariots, and many were listed in palace infantries. It is, however, unclear as to how they were employed, and that is because the only reference we have of these Aegean Mycenaeans using chariots in warfare is from the Iliad. So this is where maybe we can start to see now how important this book and this epic tale has been used. Like history's been almost built around it, and it might not even be in the right place, which is it's absolutely crazy. In the Iliad, they were used as taxis to carry heroes and commanders around the battlefield. This is of course very different from contemporary chariots used elsewhere. After the end of the Bronze Age, chariots continued to be used in the Dark Age and Classical Greece, as we know for sure that they were in use by this period and what they were in use for, which was in more of a ceremonial role rather than warfare. With the Iliad being the only real reference to Greek chariots being used in warfare going back into the Bronze Age. In Greece, they were used in religious rituals. Most famously, the Greeks continued to use chariots in the Panathenaic and the Panhellenic games. Chariot racing was a popular sport in Greece, with special venues called hippodromes being constructed to facilitate the contest. Skilled drivers became celebrities, and the wealthy competed with each other to raise the best chariot horses. Chariots were used in northwestern Europe since the Bronze Age also, though the lack of written source materials makes it difficult to say too much about them. It is possible to transport this war of the Iliad into the Celtic part of Britain, nevertheless. And Celtic, that's in Celtic, chariots of this period were very lightweight and were pulled by a pair of horses also. They were crewed by a driver and a single warrior, a tribal king or hero who appears to have mostly fought on foot. The chariot would deliver the warrior to the fighting and then driving off, circling back and then later to provide him with a method of escape. The warriors might also throw javelins from their chariots, and there are reports of Celts making use of scythed chariots as well. The last reported use of Celtic chariots in battle was at Mons Groupius, which is in Scotland in 84 CE, and this is usually dependent on finds, archaeological finds. Now, as anyone who's probably stuck around this long in this video, the very fabric of the history of Britain is all over the place. So who knows really? Britain's been a continuously occupied land for thousands and thousands of years, with seemingly an always pretty moderate to high population compared to some other parts of the world. So who knows what's still under the ground, what's being taken out the ground and destroyed. You know, there's a lot going on. However, most of what we know comes from Greco-Roman sources. In particular, we are forced to rely on the reports of Julius Caesar and Tacitus. So it is possible that in describing the Celtic chariot, they were not reporting on facts, but merely the use of older classical concepts. However, in the Iliad, chariots are used in a similar battle transportation manner, Whilst Alexander the Great faced Persian scythe chariots in Mesopotamia, it is therefore possible that these reports were meant to draw comparisons to the conquerors of the past. The Celts undoubtedly used chariots, and chariots were very important to them culturally and religiously. A couple of quotes now from Homer pertaining to chariots. Mercury opened the gate for the old man and brought in the treasure that he was taking with him for the son of Peleus. Then he sprang from the chariot onto the ground and said, "Sir, it is I, immortal Mercury, that am come with you, for my father sent me to escort you." Sorry, it's some of this, it's like Shakespeare. Of the horses, those of the son of Pheres were by the finest. They were driven by Emilus, and were as a fleet of birds. They were of the same age and colour, and perfectly matched in height. Apollo of the silver bow had bred them in Pera, both of them mares, and terrible as Mars in battle. Of the men, Ajax, son of Telamon, was much the foremost so long as Achilles' anger lasted, for Achilles excelled him greatly, and he had also better horses. But Achilles was now holding aloof at his ships by reason of his quarrel with Agamemnon, and his people passed their time upon the seashore, throwing discs or aiming with spears at a mark, and in archery. Their horses stood each by his own chariot, chomping lotus and wild celery. The chariots were housed under cover, but their owners, for lack of leadership, wandered hither and thither about the host and went not forth to fight." Unquote. In this quote, the thing that got my attention was the celery that the horses ate, and this said like wild celery. So wild celery is, like I say, it's a vegetable that's been cultivated since antiquity, and the area of eastern England, which is known as the Wash, is awash with many rivers, of which which are described as causing torrents across the Great Plain in a numerous quotes in the Iliad of, the Scamander and the flooding of the plain, not to mention a lot of the weather elemental stuff. And that just made me think of wet marshlands. So if wild celery grows in a wet marshland and these horses are eating wild celery, that I just put two and two together there. I may be right and may be wrong. The Epeans fled in all directions when they saw the caption of their horsemen. The best man they had laid low, and I swept down on them like a whirlwind, taking 50 chariots, and in each of them 2 men bit the dust, slain by my spear. Unquote. Again, we have the driver and the VIP in the chariot doing all the damage. Could the domesticated dogs, chariots and other things discussed in this video be evidence of the Trojan War being in Britain? Question mark. Again, I would not say one way or the other. We each have to make our own conclusions in the end on the information available to us. There is more, as always, to discuss with such breakdowns, and one could quite literally go through each quote and find more to discuss. I believe there must have been at least 100 plus references between Homer, Dares and Dicates to cattle, farmers, dogs and chariots alone, and even that was too much to go through. However, I shall leave this one here. There was a lot of quoting in this one, and I may have mixed up a couple of Homer's quotes with Dares and Dicates quotes, which is true because I bundled them all together and I couldn't remember which ones were which. Alas, I hope you found it interesting. The next few videos will be shorter and more breakdown style videos. And yeah, so that brings us to the end of the video. It was a couple of interesting things I'd just seen recently, and I thought I need to do a video on it. I need to investigate some of these things. And as we've seen, there could be significant evidence of, cattle, dogs being used to rear cattle and herd cattle, should I say, and corral them and things like that. in the very area which this potential Trojan conflict took place. And on top of that, we have numerous farmsteads of the area going back to that area. We have a number of destruction, like a certain amount of destruction and things like that in the area going back to this time frame. So this is stuff that we're going to look at in the archaeological video. The next couple of videos, like I say, they're going to be more readings and specifics. Like I'm going to get down into a bit more specific stuff from specific authors. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Like I say, I apologise if you got bored of the sound of my voice there. I hope to see you all soon. Catch you in the next video. Have a good one in 2024. Peace.